All right, welcome back. Today, we're going to be diving into one of history's biggest head scratchers,
Oh, yeah.
Rudolf Hess's flight to Scotland in 1941.
Fascinating story.
We've got some incredible sources here, including Hess, The Missing Years by David Irving.
Oh, yeah. Great book.
And trust me, this goes way deeper than your typical textbook account.
Absolutely.
We're talking about a top Nazi official, secret peace proposals, a solo flight in the middle of World War II.
I mean, what was he thinking?
Yeah, why would he do it?
It's a question that has baffled historians for decades.
Really has.
To really understand, I think, the magnitude of this event,
Yeah.
we need to understand kind of the state of the world in 1941.
Right, set the stage for us.
Yeah, so the Battle of Britain was in full swing.
Really raging at this point.
Oh, yeah, the outcome uncertain.
Yeah.
And the world really kind of held its breath watching these two powerful nations clash.
Then yet, behind the scenes, there were other tensions brewing, right?
Absolutely.
Hess, despite being the deputy Führer, was losing his grip on power within the Nazi party.
Absolutely. His influence had been waning for a few years.
Okay, so it wasn't a sudden thing.
No, it was a gradual process.
And what were some of the things that kind of contributed to that?
Well, Hitler had already replaced him as his designated successor with Goering,
Ouch.
which was, a significant blow to Hess's ambition and ego.
Right, so that had to sting a little bit.
Absolutely. And then just to add insult to injury, his own secretary, Martin Bormann, was steadily undermining him, seizing control of his access to Hitler.
Wow, so really kind of a double whammy there.
Yeah, it was a very calculated power play.
What I find fascinating is that Hess wasn't just some minor player in the Nazi party, right?
Not at all.
He was a founding member, a true believer in the ideology, someone who had known Hitler for years.
Absolutely very close to Hitler.
What does his fall from grace tell us about the dynamics within the Nazi regime? Was this common?
It reveals, I think, a really ruthless internal struggle for power and influence.
Mm.
While the world saw a united front behind the scenes, it was very much a viper's nest of ambition and betrayal.
Wow.
Hess's actions, while shocking, were perhaps a desperate attempt to regain his lost standing.
Right, trying to prove himself, maybe
Yeah.
get back in Hitler's good graces.
Yeah. Did he think a successful peace deal with Britain would kind of catapult him back to Hitler's favor?
It's certainly a possibility.
It's possible, yeah.
Let's talk about that flight.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision, was it?
Absolutely not.
I mean, our sources paint a picture of meticulous planning, almost an obsession with details.
Yeah, Hess spent months preparing for this mission.
Wow.
Studying maps, weather reports. He selected a specially modified Messerschmitt Bf 109 for its range and speed.
Right, because this wasn't a quick jaunt across the channel.
No, not at all.
This was a serious undertaking.
Yeah, he was flying solo at night over heavily defended enemy territory.
Wow, talk about a high-stakes mission.
Absolutely.
And what's really interesting is that he packed, 28 different types of medication.
Yeah, that's a lot of pills.
Everything from painkillers to sedatives. So clearly he was preparing for every eventuality.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about his mindset?
Well, it's hard to say for sure.
Right.
I mean, was he expecting a hostile reception? Or was he simply just a meticulous planner?
I mean, it could be a little bit of both.
It could be both.
Right.
Some historians interpret it as a sign of paranoia,
Right.
possibly fueled by his belief in the occult and astrology.
Right, which we know played a role in his thinking.
It did.
But others see it as really just a testament to his thoroughness and attention to detail.
Right, he was very detail-oriented.
And I guess we should remember, Hess was a skilled pilot with experience from World War I.
That's right.
So this wasn't some reckless act.
Right.
This was a calculated risk.
Very calculated.
Okay, so he takes off from Germany under the cover of darkness,
Right.
using his knowledge of weather patterns and radar to avoid detection.
Trying to stay under the radar literally and figuratively.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the tension in that cockpit, right?
Right. Must have been intense.
You're flying for hours alone with the fate of nations potentially hanging in the balance.
Heavy stuff.
And his destination was just as intriguing as the flight itself.
Where was he headed?
He wasn't heading for London
No.
or a major military base.
Uh-huh.
He was aiming for Dungavel House, the estate of the Duke of Hamilton.
Interesting.
So why the Duke of Hamilton? What was the connection there?
Well, Hess believed the Duke, who he had met briefly years earlier, had influence within British circles
Okay.
and could act as an intermediary for his peace proposals.
Interesting.
This reveals, I think, another facet of Hess's personality.
Right.
his belief that he could somehow single-handedly negotiate an end to the war.
It's a bold assumption, to say the least.
It is.
So walk us through the landing.
Okay.
Did everything go according to plan?
Well, not exactly.
Oh.
He ran into trouble near his destination,
Okay.
misjudged his altitude, and ended up having to parachute out of the plane.
Wow.
And he injured his ankle in the process.
Okay, so not a smooth landing.
Not ideal, no.
So he ends up landing in a field near Dungavel House.
Right.
Where he's found by a local farmer named David McLean.
Just a local farmer, yeah.
That's such a strange image to picture, right?
Yeah.
A high-ranking Nazi official parachuting into the Scottish countryside, asking a farmer for help.
Like something out of a movie.
It really is.
Yeah.
What happened next? Did he immediately reveal his identity?
Not at first, no.
Okay, so what did he do?
He initially introduced himself as Captain Alfred Horn.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow.
And tried to speak in broken English.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
It's a fascinating glimpse into his desperation and perhaps his naivety.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But he must have known the jig was up, right?
Yeah. I mean, eventually.
Did he ever manage to meet with the Duke of Hamilton?
He did, but not without some persistence.
Okay.
While being held by the Home Guard, he kept asking for the Duke by name.
So he wasn't giving up?
No, he was determined.
Eventually, Hamilton was contacted and agreed to meet this mysterious German pilot.
I mean, who wouldn't be curious?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that meeting, I imagine, was where things took a truly unexpected turn.
Oh, yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
It was there that Hess revealed his true identity and laid out his audacious plan for peace between Britain and Germany.
A plan that I'm sure raised more than a few eyebrows in London.
You could say that.
But we'll delve into those details and the British reaction after a quick word from our sponsors. So Hess has finally met with the Duke of Hamilton.
Right, the meeting he's been waiting for.
This was supposed to be his grand moment, right?
Yeah, his chance to make history.
The chance to set his peace plan in motion.
Exactly.
So what exactly did he propose?
Well, his plan was essentially for Britain to allow Germany a free hand in Europe.
Okay.
In exchange for keeping their overseas empire.
Wow.
He envisioned a world where Britain ruled the waves and Germany dominated the continent.
It sounds almost naive in hindsight, right? Here's Britain fighting for its survival against Nazi aggression, and Hess shows up expecting them to just roll over and hand over Europe.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom.
I mean, you have to remember the context here.
Right.
At this point in the war, Britain was standing alone against the Nazi war machine.
They were.
France had fallen.
Right.
The United States was still neutral.
Uh-huh.
And the Battle of Britain had just ended, leaving the country really battered and exhausted.
Yeah, they were on their heels.
So maybe Hess thought that Britain, facing such dire circumstances, might be willing to negotiate from a position of weakness.
It's possible.
But that doesn't really account for the fact that Hess's proposal essentially rewarded Nazi aggression.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough sell.
What did the British government make of all of this?
They were deeply suspicious.
And rightfully so, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, here's Hess, a high-ranking Nazi official, claiming to be on a peace mission,
Right.
but acting with, questionable authority.
Exactly.
Remember, he flew to Scotland without Hitler's knowledge or approval.
Yep.
Huge gamble.
That right there is a massive red flag, right?
Yeah.
How could the British take him seriously when there was no guarantee that Hitler would even honor any agreement Hess might make?
Exactly, just lacked credibility.
And it kind of just reeked of a desperate, maybe even delusional attempt by Hess to kind of insert himself back into the center of power.
Yeah, trying to regain his lost status.
And you mentioned earlier his interest in the occult and astrology.
Right.
I mean, did those beliefs play a role in his decision-making?
It's hard to say for certain,
Right.
but some historians believe that Hess's interest in those areas might have influenced his worldview
Okay.
and ultimately his actions.
Right.
He seems to have been convinced that he was destined to play a pivotal role in shaping history,
Wow.
perhaps even believing he was acting on some sort of divine guidance.
Which I guess is kind of a stark contrast to the cold, calculated pragmatism we often associate with the Nazi regime.
Yeah, definitely an outlier.
Did Hess ever explain why he thought he could pull this off? He believed, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, that he could appeal to a shared anti-communist sentiment
Okay.
among the British aristocracy,
Right.
convincing them that Germany was really a bulwark against the spread of Bolshevism.
It's a theory that seems pretty outlandish today,
Yeah.
but it kind of reflects Hess's distorted understanding of British politics and society.
Yeah, he was clearly operating under some misconceptions.
So what was Hitler's reaction when he found out about Hess's unauthorized peace mission?
Fury doesn't even begin to describe it.
Wow, so he was not happy.
No, he was furious.
He must have felt betrayed and humiliated. Right?
Absolutely. This was a direct challenge to his authority.
On a global stage, too.
Right in front of the whole world.
It must have been a nightmare scenario for Hitler.
Oh, totally.
Here's this, high-ranking Nazi offering peace terms to the enemy,
right,
potentially undermining the entire war effort.
It was a huge blow.
What steps did he take to kind of contain the damage?
Well, he immediately launched a full-scale propaganda campaign to discredit Hess, painting him as mentally unstable, a delusional mystic who had acted entirely on his own.
Wow, so throwing him under the bus.
Completely.
And he even ordered the arrest of astrologers and occultists across Germany. Really?
Yeah, and what became known as the Sonderaktion Hess.
Wait, so he rounded up anyone associated with the occult?
Yep, anyone who even dabbled in those areas.
Wasn't that a bit hypocritical considering Hess's own fascination with those areas?
The irony is not lost on historians.
No, not at all.
It's a chilling example of how totalitarian regimes manipulate information,
right,
scapegoating individuals and groups to serve their own ends.
So basically just using this as an opportunity to purge anyone who they saw as a potential threat.
Exactly. Eliminating dissent and consolidating power.
Wow. It's fascinating how quickly the Nazi propaganda machine went into overdrive.
They were masters of it.
To control the narrative.
Absolutely.
So what became of Hess after this failed peace mission?
Well, he didn't get what he wanted, obviously. Yeah. But what was his ultimate fate? He remained a prisoner of war in Britain for the duration of the conflict.
Okay.
And his mental state deteriorated, with reports of suicide attempts and increasingly erratic behavior.
Wow, so things really went downhill for him.
Yeah, it was a tragic end.
After the war ended, he was put on trial at Nuremberg.
Right, along with other leading Nazi figures.
And how did that trial play out for Hess?
Well, it was complicated.
Was he held accountable for his actions? So Hess is at Nuremberg, standing trial for his role in the Nazi regime. Given his, unique circumstances, how did the court handle his case?
It was a complicated situation. Hess's mental state was a key point of contention throughout the trial.
I can imagine.
While psychiatrists determined he was fit to stand trial, there were lingering questions about his mental stability during the period leading up to his flight.
Right.
So there was a lot of debate about, his culpability and his ability to understand the consequences of his actions.
Did that affect the charges brought against him or the ultimate verdict?
Well, he was ultimately found guilty on 2 counts.
Okay.
Crimes against peace and conspiracy to commit crimes.
Okay.
However, he was acquitted of crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Interesting.
So the court seemed to recognize that his role in the regime differed from other defendants.
Right.
And that his actions in 1941, however misguided, seemed to stem from a desire for peace, at least in his mind.
It's hard to reconcile those seemingly contradictory elements, right?
Yeah.
A high-ranking Nazi official who also believed he could single-handedly end the war through a secret peace deal.
It's a real paradox.
It is.
It speaks to, I think, the complexities of individual motivations within a larger historical context.
Right.
Hess was, in many ways, an enigma.
Yeah.
A true believer in Nazi ideology.
Right.
Yet someone who ultimately broke ranks in a futile attempt to alter the course of the war.
And what was his sentence? Did the court take his mental state into account when deciding his punishment?
He was sentenced to life imprisonment, the only defendant at Nuremberg to receive such a sentence.
Wow.
He spent the rest of his life in Spandau prison in Berlin, dying in 1987 under somewhat controversial circumstances.
Right. I mean, his death was ruled a suicide, but there have been, persistent conspiracy theories surrounding the circumstances.
Oh, yeah.
Some believe he was murdered to prevent him from revealing sensitive information.
It's a testament, I think, to the enduring mystery surrounding Hess.
Yeah.
Even in death, he remained a figure of intrigue and speculation.
He really did.
His flight to Scotland continues to fascinate historians and the public alike, prompting endless debates about his true motivations and the potential impact his actions could have had on the war.
I mean, as we've been going through these sources, it's clear that there's no easy answer to the question of why Hess did what he did.
No, it remains an enigma.
It seems like a convergence of factors, right?
Yeah.
His declining influence, his belief system.
Right.
Perhaps even a touch of delusion.
A perfect storm of personality and circumstance.
Yeah.
And that complexity is what makes history so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not a neat and tidy narrative.
Yeah.
but a messy tapestry of individual choices, political machinations, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior.
So what can we learn from this bizarre and ultimately tragic episode?
Well, I think it underscores the importance of critical thinking and understanding the nuances of history.
Right.
It's tempting to view historical figures as two-dimensional characters, either heroes or villains.
Yeah, good guys, bad guys.
Right, exactly. But the reality is far more complicated.
Right.
Hess's story reminds us that even within a system as monstrous as the Nazi regime, individuals can hold contradictory beliefs and act in ways that defy easy categorization.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind faith
Absolutely.
and the importance of questioning authority.
Right.
Hess, despite his high rank and proximity to Hitler, ultimately made a decision that went against the grain. A decision with profound personal and historical consequences.
It also highlights the power of propaganda.
Right.
And how easily information can be manipulated to shape public perception.
Right.
The Nazi regime's swift and ruthless response to Hess's flight demonstrates the lengths to which totalitarian governments will go to maintain control and silence dissent.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Full of intrigue, mystery, and lessons that resonate even today.
Yeah.
And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to explore.
There are countless books, articles, and documentaries dedicated to exploring the life and actions of Rudolf Hess.
It's a rabbit hole you can go down for days.
Really is.
I encourage you to continue your own exploration, digging deeper into the sources we've provided and forming your own conclusions about this enigmatic figure.
Was he a misguided peacemaker, a desperate power player, or a victim of his own delusions?
Right. The answer may never be fully clear, but the quest to understand this pivotal moment in history is what keeps it alive and relevant.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of history.
Right.
It's an ongoing conversation, a constant process of discovery and reinterpretation.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Rudolf Hess.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of history's most intriguing events.